Hello everyone and welcome back to another movie review. Today I'm going to be talking about Thor, which is the fourth entry in my MCU review series, and I'm just going to cut the crap and get into a quick plot summary. So Thor follows the titular character, Thor Odin's son, as he is about to be handed the right to the throne to Asgard by his father Odin, when the ceremony is cut short by a group of frost giants attacking their Hall of Relics. This attack causes him to betray his father's orders, collect his group of warrior friends, and head to Jotunheim, where he can attack the frost giants personally. Because of his rash actions and his betrayal of his father, he loses his powers, his hammer, and he is banished to a small town in New Mexico, where he meets physicists Jane Foster, who becomes his love interest, and Eric Selvig. While he's on Earth, he learns to cope with the loss of his hammer and his right to the throne, while on Asgard, his brother Loki forms a plan to make him become the next king of Asgard. Alright, so I'm going to start with the negatives, which unfortunately there are a lot of, because this movie is just kind of poorly made in parts. First off, my gripes with Thor's costume. I really do not like his cape, his body piece, and his eyebrows are dyed, which makes his hair and his beard look really awful. And in general, he's just poorly designed, and I'm not sure what they were thinking. He's so much better looking in, of course, Thor Ragnarok and Infinity War and Endgame, of what we've seen of him. And it's just very strange to go back and look at what he originally looked like. Also, the frost giants, which I mentioned earlier, just look awful. Up close, they have red eyes and blue skin, and it just looks terrible. They have bad dialogue. They're just not interesting characters, and I'm very glad they took a backseat for the most of the movie, because they are just not fun to watch. Also, even though this is a superhero action movie, I think the action in this movie is just plain bad. The CGI on most of it just looks terrible, and the only saving grace of the action scenes is when Thor uses his hammer Mjolnir and does spins and flips and flies. I think that's well animated and looks cool, but anyone with a sword or who's just punching, the choreography does not look good, and it's just unfortunate because those are big portions of the movie. One of my biggest complaints about this movie is the complete overuse of Dutch angles. Almost every other shot, it feels like, is tilted in some way, and it just kind of gave me a headache, and it got obnoxious very, very fast. I'm also not a big fan of Natalie Portman as Jane Foster. Jane Foster is one of my favorite characters in the comics. I was a huge fan of her Mighty Thor run, one of my favorites of all time, and she just is a huge disappointment for me. She just doesn't play the character like I would have wanted to, and she's kind of almost comedic relief, and all she's there is to look at Thor and sort of ogle him, which is just obnoxious and not how the character should have been handled, in my opinion. Also, at some point, we discovered that Loki is actually a frost giant and not the son of Odin, and that storyline could have been very, very cool. It could have been fleshed out, it could be very interesting and emotional, but they sort of just dropped it about halfway through, and it actually leads to a few minor plot holes that are a little spoilery, but it's just kind of obnoxious, and it could have been so much cooler. Also, in general, I think this movie just has a little bit too much going on. It's trying to balance the introduction of Asgard, its mythology, creation of a war, and all these realms and races and things like that, while trying to have a personal journey for Thor, his love interest, the humans coming to terms with that there's other races and aliens out there, basically aliens, and also Thor being a fish out of water god in this small town in New Mexico. It just feels unbalanced. And also they it's a part of the plot, but they also put lots of S.H.I.E.L.D. in there. Agent Coulson and Hawkeye, Clint Barton, is introduced, which is a whole nother angle on the story that just kind of makes the whole thing feel mixed up and muddled. Alright, now that those negatives are out of the way, let's just end this with a few positives. First off, I think that the Asgardian CGI is fantastic. The city itself looks great, the Bifrost, the auroras, the particle effects, all of that is very, very visually stimulating, and was a clear inspiration for the Guardians of the Galaxy visual style, which almost everyone is a fan of, and I personally really enjoyed. So that was a great and big surprise to me, since I hadn't seen this movie almost since it came out. I also think that the casting was very well done. John Hopkins plays Odin, Idris Elba as Heimdall, the Gatekeeper, of course, Chris Hemsworth as Thor, and Tom Hiddleston as Loki. They all do great in their roles, even if the dialogue and costume design and things that they were given didn't hold up so well. The actors themselves did a great job with what they had. I also really enjoyed the involvement of S.H.I.E.L.D. Having Hawkeye introduced, mentions to Stark, Agent Coulson sort of having the experience from Iron Man 1 and 2, and that all feeding into lots more of S.H.I.E.L.D. in this movie, which is very interesting, and I like how they tied it into the greater Marvel Universe. Another sort of side character that's introduced is a giant suit of armor that shoots flames out of its face called the Destroyer, which is a big part of the Thor comics, and I thought that was really well done, even if it sort of was just used for an action sequence. It's well animated, it looks cool, the fight sequences that it's in are fun to watch, and I just enjoyed the Destroyer overall, which is great because the Frost Giants were so meh. I also really enjoyed the fish out of water juxtaposition of a small town in New Mexico and Thor being a godly man who shows up, and the Warriors 3 show up eventually, and this great big battle with the Destroyer goes down, and it's a very cool balance of Earth versus space, which is something we haven't really seen in the MCU until Infinity War, or the Avengers. I also think that Loki is definitely the best villain in the MCU thus far, or at least until what had been released. Definitely better than Obadiah Stane and Justin Hammer and the Abomination. All of those were not very well developed, but Loki has a lot of screen time. He completely controls the plot with all of his lies and mischievous plans in the background, and he actually gets a lot of development on his own, which helps lead into the movies that he shows up in the future. I also really like how they handled the introduction of Asgard into the greater Marvel Universe. Up to this point, they hadn't really done anything outside of Earth. Everything else had just sort of been contained to Earth, and now Asgard and all of the realms and things associated with it had to be introduced. And they used that well with how humans in the past saw the gods as gods, but now we see it as mythology, and how some of the physicists say that magic is just science that we don't understand yet. And I thought those concepts were really interesting and helped set up Asgard a lot more intertwined with the earthly MCU. So in the end, I think Thor is one of the most just average MCU movies. It has a couple great moments, it has a great concept, it has a great villain, all the actors do a great job, but so many small things, plot holes, bad dialogue choices, bad design choices, hold it back from really telling a great story because it just overcomplicates itself. I give this movie 2.5 out of 5 stars. I think it is pretty necessary to watch for Thor as a character because he's so important in the MCU, but it's just not a great standalone movie on its own because of all the problems that it has. So thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this review for Thor. I will quickly be reviewing Captain America the First Avenger and the Avengers before I see Endgame on opening night on Thursday. So look forward to those, and I will see you guys in those and future videos. Bye. And hello, if you stayed to past the end, here's a quick final thought that's a little more spoilery, so I didn't want to put it in the main review. But at one of the final climactic moments, when Loki lets go of Thor and falls off of Asgard into the cosmos or wherever he's going, he sort of T-poses. He just goes like this and falls. And I actually laughed my ass off in that moment. It was so poorly done, it killed the emotional weight of the scene, and I have no idea what they were thinking because it was just so weird. So this is really the end. Thank you so much, especially those of you who saw this part, for watching, and I will see you guys in another video. Bye.